The Mad Rap Dad is the product of unfulfilled ambitions and a whole lot left to say about the world, all rolled up into one nifty midlife crisis. And the Mad Rap Dad joins us now. How are you today?
I'm doing very well. How are you?
I'm excellent, thank you. Now, your latest single, called Troubles, is coming out very soon, indeed. What can you tell us about it?
Well, it's a bit of a loaded question, I suppose. Like this one here is certainly more on the serious side. I mean, you could probably assume from just it's in the title itself. It started as somewhat of a political song that was written. I'm gonna go ahead and say 15 years ago. So just a bit of background about who I am is my academic background formally is in a very fringe topic of Canadian Irish studies. So, when I was learning that stuff, I was really fascinated by, and I had always been fascinated by the human tendency, like for groups of people to carry out atrocities against each other. And then as a Canadian brought up in the 20th century, like all of that seemed like almost fictitious to me. But it really started to hit home when I started to learn about, the realities of what had happened in Northern Ireland throughout, particularly the 70s, the 80s, and arguably up into the late 90s, and how it's still very divided. And I was really wide-eyed and kind of idealistic at the time. I had taken a really strong position about this, and I felt really strongly about it. And so I wrote, I guess that was sort of the inception of the song. And I was kind of outspoken, but in very small circles. And then, I started to pen that. I'm going to say I played in a punk band at the time called Without Will, and I think there's a lot of material about that still out there. And I wrote the song with the band, or I wrote it for the band, I should say, at that time, and it was never released. And then there is a version of it that was released under a band called the Pivot Tones, which is still a going project. It's sort of a collective of which the Mad Rap Dad is a part of. But I didn't feel that it really encapsulated the essence of the song, which was, it's not a political song. It doesn't endeavor to sort of synthesize a political position on any matter, one side or the other, because I don't think it's that or any of those other conflicts have been mine to really speak of, but more of it as an outsider's perspective. It's a lament on the divisions within society that are caused by, the post-colonial legacy of tactics of divide and conquer. I know that's really heavy, kind of really long-winded there, but that's sort of the gist of it.
Yes. Do you tend to write a lot about political lyrics, and how do you feel your fans react to that? I mean, do they enjoy it? I don't know if enjoy is the right word.
I'll be honest with you. As Mad Rap Dad it's fresh, it's new, and that's why there's stuff out there, but there isn't much because, as I say, it's a very recent project, and it was a departure. Because I mean, it's largely hip hop. This song itself, it's not really, because I said I wrote it in the punk days, and then the aesthetic that it took on was fundamentally different from both those genres. But I would say, like, honestly, from what I did with the Pivot Tones and ACAB Records, anything that we had released, albeit to a very small audience, that was political, dark, and serious, got no traction. And then, as I learned, social media, especially since the pandemic, has made concerted efforts to suppress those types of posts. And so when you're releasing exclusively via Facebook or Instagram, to an extent, those posts don't get picked up by the algorithms. And so it's been very difficult to sort of get that stuff out. We had a song with the Pivot Tones denouncing a faction of the Quebec, locally in Canadian government, at one point, a political party, and it literally got nowhere. But then when you release the funny stuff, people pick up on that. But it's also because it gets a lot more visibility. And ultimately, at this stage in my life, I'm a 41-year-old man with kids. I've had a lot to say about politics, and this is an older piece. I'm going forward. I'm probably going to write a lot more fun stuff about silly observations, about getting older. But the political stuff, no. I mean, it's been heavy. I just felt with this, whether people wanted to hear it or not, I feel like it had to be said. It's something that had to get out of my system. And I know that somewhere out there, there's a group of dissenters that'll pick up on this and say, hey, you know what, this is good. I like the tone of the song. The song's good, and the content, it just sort of resonates. I know they're out there somewhere.
It's interesting because I think there's a lot of people who would maybe say the opposite about social media, where algorithms algorithms are designed to promote stuff that's going to divide us and make us angry, i.e. any kind of political things? Does it depend on what it is? If it's stuff that you actually want to promote and have people see, it's not going to get any views. But all the stuff that's just nonsense, everyone will see that.
Yeah, and you're dead right that at some point, all the stuff that was divisive because people engaged with it, right? So things that would make people angry, they'd want to go in and they'd want to troll or just put out some sort of rebuttal. That's what they were promoting. But Facebook was heavily criticized for that, and this is why they changed it. And now we're in an opposite situation. Fast forward, 2-3 years after those reforms were put in place, and so now it's a lot more difficult. So, I'm not huge on social media. I've had to, unfortunately, get into things like Instagram over the last couple of years, and that's not a slight in any way, shape, or form, but it's I'm out of my element, really. But you have to kind of get with the times a little bit. But what I get targeted on is like men without shirts and lots of tattoos doing exercise routines. I'm like, so what if I clicked on to look at this? Because really and truly, like, I've never gone out and searched this stuff, but there doesn't seem to be anything besides what's really kind of superficial. I think most people would agree. I'm not denouncing the people that like that. That's great. It's not for me. I'm more of an intellectual, and it's tough to kind of find that stuff that's relatable out there these days.
Yeah. Now, your music covers all sorts of genres, doesn't it? Do you have a tough time deciding what genre you're going to do, or do you just enjoy a variety?
I do enjoy variety. Like the punk stuff it's in my heart. Hip hop's in my soul. When you work with a band, though, I will say that it's a lot more complicated and it's a lot more difficult to be productive. So, a person like me, fueled heavily by ADHD, I need to move quickly from one thing to the other. And it's difficult to pull people around that aren't like-minded or people who might, otherwise have other priorities. Whereas hip hop gives you the outlet and the freedom, the flexibility to be able to work when you want, when you don't want to. Like, for example, like if I want to make a new hip hop song, I'm making beats on my phone while my kids are in kung fu class, like true story. When you're in a punk band, you don't have that flexibility. So it's like, you got to get the guys together, show them the bones of the song. They work out their parts, etc. So there's a lot of moving pieces. So you can't be as prolific with releases, for example. And you're bound to encounter differences in creative. So it's a lot harder. And so hip hop for me now is the vessel that I'm using most. And I've done it since I was about 15 years of age. So it's not like it's new. I'm just revisiting something that I had done before. And yeah, I'll weave back and forth. And if there's a song where the tone fits punk better, maybe I'll throw in some 808s in there and then some guitars and just sort of mix it up. Kind of like, I don't know, I want to say Beastie Boys are probably the closest that I could think of. But yeah, I like to mix it. Yeah, for sure.
Hip hop and punk are two completely different genres, but there are a few similarities in that often the lyrics can be politically motivated and sometimes the style can be deliberately lo-fi. So do you find that the two genres is kind of natural for you to do both?
100%. And you said it perfectly well. I've always said that, and I've met like-minded people that have agreed with that as well, is that to me the inceptions of both movements are almost identical. Like they were sort of countercultures. They were sort of, started either at a house party or in a basement somewhere. I mean, obviously the origins, especially when it comes to punk, are highly in dispute. But that's what it started. They were both musical genres that were countercultures against the sort of, like commercial sounds at the time, whether it's disco or whether it's arena rock, and they started off on their own thing. And they were also the voice of the oppressed, and when one was, say, the oppressed of, the British youth at the time during the economic crisis, or, the black inner city American youth who'd been long time oppressed and were finally now getting a chance to get out there with their reality. And that was especially more so as the 80s progressed, with NWA and with gangster rap, and that became the mainstay, I suppose, for hip hop. So in that sense, yeah, I think they're very similar in terms of their origin. They also came up at around the same time, right? 1970s. Yeah. And that, I mean, when I say hip hop, I mean hip hop up until probably like maybe 2000, because after that it took a departure from there and it became the mainstream, but it was a subculture, and as was punk.
And what do you think the secret behind the everlasting appeal of punk is? Because I think if you added up all the punk hits, there weren't that many compared to other genres in this country anyway. and yet everybody knows it and acts as if it was the biggest thing that ever happened in music at that time.
Ooh, yeah, that's loaded. Yeah, the appeal to it, I can only speak on my behalf. I mean, I don't know what, I mean, I think there's the political message that resonates, but then the punk that really took off during the 1990s wasn't all that political. It really kind of became asinine, and it was more about, partying and having a good time, being, self-deprecating in a way.
Yeah.
So it was different, but it appealed to the youth at the time. It was a lighter culture, it was more about fun and skateboarding, and then all of a sudden punk was now associated with sports and extreme sports and stuff like that, whereas before it had sort of shunned that. As you can see, like, punk evolved too, but the sound of punk, and I think the DIY aesthetic of punk, and for me, when I got into punk, I didn't play any instruments. I knew how to play power chords, and that was about it. That's all I needed. And
Yeah.
I had never really played it. Even I'd never practiced it. I just knew it, and I went out there and just did it. And that's what the essence of punk was at the beginning. I think hip hop was too. It was an easy enough, use a sampler and throw a few things together, and it really democratized music. That's the other similarity. And I think that appeal is still very much there for punk, because you don't need to be a great musician to write good songs, and I think the time has proven that. And like Ramones to me, which is still one of my biggest influence. I got them tattooed on my knee there.
Wow.
The sound it's very basic. It's, there was no frills, there was no major huge guitar solos to sort of jazz it up. It was the bare bones of the song. The songs are in their own right, and they had that pop sensibility to them. So the whole dynamic of it to me is genius. And, I think that's what it is. All of that.
Yes. And yet for the Ramones, their biggest hit wasn't really a punk song. So I guess there's kind of similar to you, where they have a variety of content.
Yeah. Well, the End of Century album that was done by Phil Spector, I would argue that there wasn't a single punk song on that record, and it was certainly their most commercially viable. Probably not their most successful album, but their most commercially viable. And that's what it is. Like, if you want to break into that market and say, okay, you're going to either play underground, piss stain, sorry for the expression, clubs for the rest of your life, or maybe try to move up in the world and play some bigger venues, play for more people, make a bit of money, tour the world in places where you don't have to sleep on a futon.
Your name, of course, that you go by is the Mad Rap Dad. What made you want to go for that name? Because it arguably puts young people off, because they're like, I don't want to listen to a dad.
Yeah, I think so. But I think at the same time, it might have the effect of saying, well, this is so ridiculous, I just need to see what it is. And the name's absolutely ridiculous, and it basically sums up what I am. And although I am in my 40s, I don't feel like I am, and I still feel like I have the essence. And I think most people would say the same thing. But it is what it is. Like, I can't at my age, and it would feel contrived. And either way, I don't want to do it. Try to keep up with the sounds of what people are doing now. I don't like how rap sounds anymore, and not to discredit them. That's great for them. It's just not what I like. And I like the sounds of the 90s. Hip hop is golden. Anything from New York, the New York Underground, Tribe Called Quest, Das Effects. That's the stuff that I like. A De La Soul. I even love the West Coast stuff. I can't relate to what hip hop is now. So if I try to go in, I know some guys do, and try to update myself, I feel like I'm not being true to who I am. And who I am is a product of my time. And that was, 80s rap. I got into rap in the 80s initially. And then later on really heavily into the 90s. So it had to be what it is. And said, why would I cater to an already saturated market of, like, I guess mumble rappers or whatever it is they call themselves? Now there's a million of those guys. Like, go on SoundCloud, go on, BandLab and all of these places. There's tons of people trying to do that, and most of them very poorly. It's unfortunate. There's some good ones though. So I'm just going to stick with what I know and know that there is a market. And who knows, like, maybe some of the kids will look at this and say, hey, you know what? This old guy's still got it. He's got some moves. He's got some rhymes, and, bump a few tracks.
Yeah. And do you think that more people are into that 90s punk thing and hip hop? Do you think people are maybe fed up of a lot of music today? Because if you picked a few songs in the top 10 of the charts, at least one of them would be exactly 3 minutes long and sound like something you'd heard before.
Yep. Yeah, no, for sure. I think if you look at the styles and the way people are dressing, I swear I slept for 20 years or 25 years and woke up in the 90s again, because people are dressing that way. So at least stylistically, there is sort of a reversion back to that kind of music. And I do believe that it may not be a revolution in the way that, you know, the punk movement was, or the inceptions of hip hop was, but I do think that there are a lot of people that are going to turn back to things that are a lot more, and I want to say organic, and I know that means like, well, the music now is artificial. It is more processed than it was back then, but I think that people will get fed up and the direction in which music is going now. I just don't see where else it's going to go. Like, how much further could they push the envelope after they brought in auto-tune and everything? Now you could do anything from a MIDI controller, right? Some people might go back to listen to things that are a little bit more wholesome and, organic sounding. I do believe that's the case. And there'll always be a market for it. That's the beautiful thing about music, is it doesn't have to be mainstream. Like, I'm not aiming to be mainstream. It won't happen, as you pointed out with my name. That's not a name that's going to take off mainstream. I'm fully aware. I'm not oblivious to this, but there is a market out there, and there will be some. There was a rapper from Swollen Members, Mocha Only, a Canadian rap group. You may have heard of them, but they were very big in the early 2000s. And he'd become an acquaintance of mine. He said something, and that stuck with me. I don't remember any of our other conversations, but he said, look, there's a market out there for anything. You can fart on a microphone and there'll be someone that'll buy it. And that stuck with me. So I'm like, yeah, that's great. So, yeah, you know, it's rather than jump out into the pool of the millions of people doing the same thing, do something and then go and find your market. And that's not easy, but if you're willing to put in the time for it, eventually someone will pick it up.
And the way technology's going these days, it'll only be a few months before you don't even have to write a song or record it anymore. You just ask a computer to do it, and there you go, you've got a hit.
Yeah. I think I have a feeling that a lot of people are writing songs that way, because it's formulaic, right? So there's, you know, all you need to do is drop into the machine, you know, a dozen or so songs for each generation. It'll pick up the pattern in how pop music is written, and it'll start to generate them. And then you just click on a button and it'll give you a variation of that. Like the guy from ACAB Records, which I need to shout out, because my buddy Mike Free is the guy who I'm working with on this project most, and we're going to be doing a lot of releases together and have already. Huge support. But anyway, he showed me this website where you type in the artist's name and it will generate an entire song written from A to Z, lyrics wise, about how that person typically writes. And it even uses algorithms from music from underground musicians, not even just mainstream guys. So I thought that was crazy. Yeah.
That's amazing. Do you think that AI will ever truly take over? Because there isn't really a formula to a hit song or even a good song. So do you think that artificial intelligence will just be exactly the same as a person writing a song? It can still be hit or miss, or maybe there is a formula and we just haven't discovered it yet.
Well, there is, and I mean, I think the most music producers, the high level ones, kind of know it. There's certain things that you can do. I mean, I don't know if it's a formula. Certainly a subset of rules, though, or at least or best practices in writing. And as this is why, you know, every song from the 50s used the same progression, and then pop music still does it. It's just that they disguise it now. So there's an approach to it that's standard, and I think machines can grab it. Whether or not that's going to replace musicians, I doubt it, because you still have, you know, people who are painting, people who are drawing by hand. Even though we don't really need these people, there's a taste for art. There is a taste for the human connection to art, so that will never go away. We may use computers to assist us. Like, I could go and do a vocal take, and if it's not completely perfect, I may tweak a note here or there rather than redo it 20 times, and that's fun. I was so against auto-tune at the beginning but then after a while, you know, you if you want anything played commercially, at least, or on the radio, to keep up with the sound and the timbres, you kind of have to use it to a little bit, as long as you don't go crazy with it. But I mean, I think, anyways, to circle back to your question, I genuinely believe that you cannot separate the human element from art ever, and then or else it stops being art, and I don't think people will stop wanting to consume art. So no, never. I don't think that'll happen.
Yeah. Well, what's coming up for you? Do you have more projects after this single, and albums, singles, even shows?
And then for sure, we're gonna play a lot of things by ear. And when I say I say me, myself, and my partner from ACAB Records. We're gonna just release, and there isn't like, well, we're gonna do an album. There's no Gantt chart to the way that we're doing things. We've show coming up this spring. No dates set for sure, but we'll definitely be releasing the information information for that as soon as it's done. But we're gonna definitely be the plan for me would be to release something on different platforms, hopefully one song per month, whether it be hip hop or a blend of things, between hip hop and punk, or maybe even just a pure punk song. But that would be the plan, and just sort of do it, go with the flow, and not say, well, we have to do things according to a chronology or a date, or this is how other bands or other musicians are doing it, so we got to do it that way. We're just trying to be creative, be as productive as we can be, put out as much stuff, and just honestly, at this point in my life, I don't know if I could swear on the show, can I?
You can, but I'll edit it out, so either way.
Yeah, I've got very few left to give. So, I'm just trying to get, have as much fun with it, be as productive, say as much as I can, get it out there, and just hopefully somebody will pick it up and enjoy it, and I'm sure they will.
ACAB Records, is that politically motivated?
I am gonna go and say, yeah, I didn't found the company or the project. It stands for All Cats Are Beautiful.
Oh,
and I can vouch for Mike. Mike loves cats, right? So but I think it's it could be a play on words, but it's certainly diluted. There may have been an allusion to it. We're not as political as some punk rock groups, and but advocate violence against police or authorities or whatever. But that may have been, and since Mike's roots are mostly in punk rock, there's definitely a some kind of allusion or influence there. Yeah, for sure.
Well, where are we able to find all your music, and of course the song Troubles?
So Troubles is out officially tomorrow, and I suppose by the time this airs it'll already be released. It is on Spotify, so under the Mad Rap Dad, which at the moment there's only one single, which is Midlife Crisis, which is completely different. It's a comedic song, as should be the tone of most of what'll be released thereafter. It'll be there. I'll probably put it up on some of the smaller the open source platforms like BandLab, SoundCloud of the page, and Reverb Nation. So also I have an Instagram. It's under the Pivot-Tones at the moment, and that will be where most of the news and updates will be coming out on.
Excellent. Well, many thanks for talking to us today. It's been great having you on.
Oh, it's been a huge pleasure. I really appreciate you. Thank you very much for the time, and the interview was a pleasure.